All right. Can I just get a, all right. So thank you, Dan. So as Dan said, my name is Bill Bernier. I'm with the Department of Health Office of Drinking Water. I manage the operator certification and training section. I'm also manage a couple of other programs, which include our cross-connection control program. And I've had 2 cups of coffee and a bowl of my kids' sugar cereal, so I'm pretty hyper. So I really want to encourage you to ask questions either in that chat box or unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, I'm just going to burn through and tell you what I want to tell you. And I would prefer to answer your questions and make this more valuable for you. But we'll just see how it goes. Before coming to the Department of Health, I worked for a engineering company where I did a lot of design work of water systems. I also managed a bunch of water systems. So I have a WDM2. I'm a cross-connection control specialist. I used to be a backflow assembly tester once upon a time, but I've let that lapse since. So yeah, lots of experience, lots of stuff. And then, yeah, let's just jump right into it. So we're going to talk about cross-connection control hazard surveys today. I like to put this slide up because there are so many rules that involve cross-connection control. The 2 main ones for me are these, WAC 246-290-490. Those are drinking water rules, and then 246-292, which are our OPCERT rules. But there are tons and tons and tons, and we do work really hard trying to make sure that all these rules don't contradict each other. There are places, and anybody that's been doing it for a while, you'll see that the plumbing code and our drinking water rules don't mesh perfectly, but we do try our best to do it. And then this is one that I think people forget a lot, is that WAC 5156. The key to this slide is that I want to get across to you, though, is you don't need to memorize these rules. You just need to know that they exist. When you go out and you're doing a hazard survey, you can pretty much rely on your common sense. You can think about the physics of what's happening, and if you see something that you don't think is right, it's probably not. There's probably a rule somewhere that says that it's not, but you don't need to know it. You can look it up later, or you can even just give me a call and say, this is what I found. Take a picture of it, which is always great. And that way you can share with your peer group and say, this is what I found. They're saying they don't need to do anything about it, but I think they do. And we'll find somewhere in the rules where it says that it's not okay. Some people get very hung up on the rules of, I haven't memorized everything, so therefore I'm not feeling qualified to do the work. And that's not true at all. The more times you go out there, the more experience you get, the better you will be at it. And then, like I said, the rules come secondary to making sure that everybody's safe and healthy. So jumping in, hazard surveys, they're very important. They're in the rules, as I forget which number it is in the code, but you don't know where backflow assemblies go if you don't know where the hazards are, and you don't know if those backflow assemblies are appropriate. Because different levels of hazard assessment means different types of backflow assemblies. So you need to know what you have in order to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Hazard surveys come in 2 or 3 main groups, and they kind of divide pretty well along commercial connections and residential connections. That's not to say that that's a perfect line, but when I was running my program, almost all the residential connections, I did a mailing survey. So I would mail the customers a form, ask them to fill it out, letting me know what kind of water using equipment that they had. So they would check the box if they had a hot tub that filled from the bottom, or they had an in-ground sprinkler system, or they had a hot water boiler, anything that the water, their plumbing was connected to, any kind of equipment that uses potable water. They would check the box, and then you would take that mailing when they mailed it back to you, and then you would look and see if they checked anything, and then give them a call, because 9 times out of 10, they didn't really know what they were checking. And so you have to verify that work. And mailings are challenging because my kind of rule of thumb is every time you mail out, you mail out 100 mailers, you'll get 50 back. And then you mail out you mail out those last 50, you'll get 25 back. And so you never ever get to the end. I forget which Greek philosopher it was, but if you always have to hit the halfway point, you never ever get to the end. And so mailings are a challenge. Residential customers are a challenge. And so our schedule was, we tried to do commercial connections every 2 years. We tried to do residential connections every 5 years and do hazard surveys. And I will tell you right now, we never got our residential connections done every 5 years. It's such a challenge, and you have to brace yourself emotionally and financially to tackle that hurdle. And so just throwing that out there. The mailings can be hard, and mailings can be good also for really small commercial connections. If there isn't much going on, not much, coffee shops or things that aren't going to have a whole lot going on in there, a mailer may be great for that. But there's sometimes with your commercial connections, and I like to do it for all of my commercial connections, is go on site and do a hazard survey, which seems intimidating at first, but after the first couple, it really starts getting fun, and you start looking forward to it. And for those of you that haven't done them or haven't done very many of them, be patient with yourself. You'll find that you went out and you did an on-site survey, and then 5 years later, you went out and did another on-site survey, and you missed something just completely obvious. And that's just the nature of the game. You're going out there and you're doing the best that you can. But the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the safer your water system's going to be. Another way of breaking it down is, existing connections. You're going out there and you're seeing what you have, and then going out and periodically resurveying to make sure what's changed. You're catching it. Another way of surveying is new construction. When you look at those designs, and that can be a tricky thing. So new construction, I'm not really going to get into that because that's, looking at a lot of blueprints, talking to, architects. It can be tricky. It can be not a lot of fun. A lot of people that think they're smarter than you, and you have to stand up for yourself. But we're going to talk almost exclusively about on-site surveys today, because they're the most fun. They're the most action. And it's, it's just more fun. So an on-site survey is a partnership between you, the surveyor, the building owner, and the regulator. So either me or your local health department, whoever's in charge, maybe even the plumbing code folks. And when you think of it that way, if it's not just you standing on an island, 9 times out of 10, everybody wants to do the right thing. They just have different ideas of what the right thing are. And so as the surveyor, a good portion of your job is educating. They're not going to know as much as you about cross-connection control. They're going to think they do, but they don't actually know. And so, being patient, being understanding, and explaining things while you're out there really goes a long way. And, understanding why you're there to protect public health. Not just in your distribution system, but when you go in a building and you're doing a hazard survey, you're actually protecting the people within the building as well, the people using the water, and oftentimes the people that are arguing with you about what needs to happen. So you're protecting them. You're actually doing that work. Don't overwhelm them with information, though. Kind of keep it on the, as simple of terms as possible. Sometimes we use lots of words like back siphonage. You'll start getting glassy eyes when you start using those catchphrases that we have in the cross-connection control world. You talk about backflow, back siphonage. We like to rattle off just letters together: RPBA, DCVA, PVBAs, and people don't really know what those are. So you kind of need to slow down and explain things as you move along. Another great thing for hazard surveys is get as much information as possible before the survey. I will say that is kind of a catch-22, because sometimes you'll think that you're going in to look at a nursery. And then when you get inside the doors, actually had turned into a marijuana grow facility the year before. And so all that documentation that you looked at is just garbage. And so, kind of get as much information as you can, but don't go overboard, because, a lot of schematics, a lot of things, plumbing diagrams that you'll have are going to be outdated, or they won't exist. And so don't bang your head against the wall. But if there's nice, obvious stuff, then go ahead and get it. Get an understanding of what you're going to look for. If you're going to look at a marijuana grow facility, you're going to look for that. You're going to look for that reverse osmosis treatment unit. You're going to look for that condenser reclaim line. You're going to look for specific things if you know what you're going in and what you are looking at. And then this is just a personal preference, that last bullet. I like to start from the source, whether it's the meter or the property line, or if it's, if it has an individual well. I like to start from where the water comes from, and I like to walk through, and I like to try to trace the lines as best you can as you go through. Things that you might want to consider bringing with you. The smartphone it's a pretty awesome tool. It is not just for Candy Crush. You could do all kinds of things with that thing. That USC list of approved assemblies, they have a mobile app version, which is just awesome, because you can just punch in the assembly that you see, and it'll tell you if it's on the list or not. You can look up your ASSE codes, and that call a friend is just incredible. I do it. I do it all the time. And then people do it with me too. They'll snap a picture, send it to me, give me a call and say, hey, I have no idea what this thing is. Do you know what it is? And I don't know everything, but I do know people that do know everything. And so we can work through it and try to figure out what's going on. But yeah, that smartphone is, they're amazing. Take pictures, and I don't know if I'm the only person in the world, but sometimes I'll take a picture and I'll have no idea what I took a picture of, like 2 days later when I go to download the photos. So document what that picture was. Take your pen and paper, take some notes. Talk to the people that you're meeting, not just your first contact, but as you're walking through, just talk to people and try to figure out what water using equipment you have. Passing out business cards is always a great idea. And then an ID badge. If you have something that you can hang around your neck, it doesn't matter what it is. It could have Mickey Mouse on it, but people will see a badge and they'll think, oh, well, he can go anywhere he wants, or she can go anywhere she wants because they've got a badge. They must know what they're doing. Weird, but a true statement. I just want to go back to that talking to people. So I was on an oyster growing facility. It's been years ago. But we were walking through, and everything was going great. And I was talking to somebody that was going there, and his Spanish was his English was way better than my Spanish. But we finally got through it, and he said that the drinking fountain sometimes tasted salty. And I was, kind of taken back. I'm like, okay, well, let me try to figure this out. And, where would salt water be coming from in this facility? And it was near the Hood Canal, and I went outside, and there was a little shed down by the water. And I said, well, does the water run down to that little shed? And they said, no. There's no water down there. It's there's just nothing down there. We just have big tanks with oysters in them. And I said, oh, okay. Well, can we go down there and look at it anyway? And that sounds pretty cool. And we went down there, and they had a big pump that was pumping water out of the Hood Canal into these big tanks holding the oysters. And then the water would flow back out again, back down to the Hood Canal. But there was one little copper line that was going into the priming line of that pump. And I said, well, what's this? And they said, oh, well, that pump loses suction all the time. So we just leave that water running full time. So it automatically gets suction again and starts pumping. And so when that pump got suction, it would pump water back up to the freshwater line, all the way back up to the building, into the drinking fountain. So they were drinking Hood Canal water. So talking to people really does help you identify problems and then where they're coming from. Other things to bring, a flashlight. Laser pointers are fantastic. But I will say, when you pull out your fancy laser pointer and you get that cocky look on your face, and then it doesn't work, so bring extra batteries. You got to have your multi-tool, because sometimes you need to get remove some screws or pry something open, and then inspection mirrors will save your back a ton of trouble, because those inspection plates on the backflow assemblies are sometimes hard to see. Remember your personal protective equipment. If you're going to go anywhere that's going to have any kind of hazards, bring your hard hat, goggles, boots, hearing protection, your confined space entry equipment, fall protection. Be safe. You can get carried away. You'll find yourself crawling around in the muck under the deck plates, just having a great time. But always keep safety in mind as you're doing hazard surveys. And then I like to have a template. I like to list all the things that I want to look for, and then make sure that I looked for them. So create yourself a template, like what they're using the water for, where the cross connections exist, what the degree of hazard is on those cross connections. If they already have a backflow assembly, go ahead and write that down. And then, if I get the test report form for that year, if they have one, if they don't, then, that's a good comment. And then anything that anybody's arguing at you, go ahead and list those references or regulations or whatever that governs that situation. The date, location of stuff, you want to have a nice long report. But the big thing here is that disclaimer at the end. So when you finish that report and you send it to the water utility and you send it to the building owner and whoever has jurisdiction over the plumbing code, at the bottom, you don't want to say, this is the way it is, or, I did my hazard survey and there are no cross connections within the building, because you're not going to be able to see everything. And so don't make definitive statements. Make statements like, this is what I saw on this day. To the best of my knowledge, this is the way things are. Because even if you did see everything and you went through the whole building and everything was perfect, as soon as you drive out the driveway, somebody could be in there monkeying with the plumbing. And so you want to go ahead and make sure that everybody knows that this is a moving target. Cross-connection control is not easy. Cross-connection control is not a one-time thing. Cross-connection control is a lifestyle and a philosophy, and it needs constant work in order to be good and appropriate and keep everybody safe. Things that you can look for that are pretty common: irrigation systems, solar heating systems. They often have makeup lines. Boilers have makeup lines. Auxiliary water supplies are a really good one. I won't throw anybody under the bus, but here on the west side, there was this has been a few years back, but we had a drought, I think 5 years ago, and water in this lake dropped pretty low. And somebody in a boat was driving around and they were asking, what are these pipes coming from people's yards, sticking into the lake? And it was people keeping their water green by pumping, keeping their lawns green by pumping out of the lake. Well, they were looking and they could see the ends of the pipe because of the drought. The water level was so low that the end of the pipe was up, but every third or fourth lawn was still green. And it made them think, well, if they're pumping out of the lake to keep their lawns green and they can't pump out of the lake anymore, how is their lawn still green? And they found literally hundreds of cross connections they cross connected between the lake and their potable water distribution system with a single valve keeping them separate. All the homeowners said, oh, but we never ever forget to shut that valve. That's not good enough. That is a scary situation. And they're still working on correcting it because, retrofitting is so hard. But, just keep in mind those auxiliary water supplies, farms, a lot of them will have old wells that they're interconnected with. But they're hand dug wells. So in the summertime, they sometimes run dry, and then they'll interconnect with the potable water supply. They don't want to use the potable water supply because it costs money. but sometimes they have to. And so you just need to, yeah, auxiliary water supplies are a big thing. Livestock watering, there's some pretty cool new equipment out there that for livestock watering. So there are options when somebody argues with you. Fire suppression systems, water treatment plant equipment. There's lots and lots of things. Just follow the water lines, see where they're connected to, see what people are using them for. Does anybody, I feel like I've been just prattling on. Does anybody have any questions or comments or want to call me pretty? Anybody? All right. Is anybody still awake? Anybody want some of my kids' sugar cereal? Because it really does the trick. All right. Well, we're going to get into the fun part now. So you're going to go out and you're going to do a hazard survey. You show up, and there are pipes running everywhere. You know, and only one of them is potable water. And so one of the things you're going to look for is, you know, does this labeling on this potable water line, does it change further down the road? Which you'll be shocked that sometimes it does. It'll just magically turn into something else, or something else will magically turn into potable water. And it's like, hey, what happened there? Can you imagine if you went in here and it wasn't this well labeled? You know, how would you know what all these water lines were heading for? And you'll see sometimes you get in there and city water, non-potable, going to a sink. But it's going through an RPBA, so what are they using this water for? Should it be a deep sink? You know, should there be a hand wash station right here if this is non-potable water? There's lots of things when you're walking around out there to take a look at. I think this is Terry Pickles' picture, I believe. But sometimes they're not labeled. And so, you know, try to trace it out, try to figure that out. You know, where's the bottom water line go? Where does all this other stuff go? People can get very, very creative with their piping schematics. And if you don't have it right, you can get very, very creative with your health and safety concerns. This was at actually a water treatment plant. And this was, I think it was a caustic soda line, got cross-connected here. So these are some different scenarios where you're going to run into it and you're going to need to think. So way back when, you know, they had a potable water line. It was to a makeup line to the plant water. They decided to use reclaimed water because they have lots of reclaimed water. And so they wanted to use it. So they pulled out the RPBA that was sitting here. Actually, I think this was a double check valve assembly actually between here. They pulled it out, put on these blank flanges. And at first you think, you know, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But then you start thinking, well, what if the reclaimed water system went down, or part of the filtering system went down and it wasn't a high enough quality reclaimed water to be used in the plant anymore? And you start looking, and on the other side of this bookshelf, they still had the backflow device setting on the floor. And you start thinking, well, wait a minute, if they can just spin, you know, 8 bolts and reinstall that backflow assembly, what are the odds of them doing it in the future? And you need to remember your definition of actual or potential cross connections with the potable water system. And I guarantee that backflow assembly sitting on the floor over there hadn't been tested in 10 years. It was just sitting there getting kicked around the shop. And if they were to throw that in there, there was no guarantee that it would work. Or if, you know, that backflow assembly got lost and they still wanted to do it, they could just easily make a spool piece. And so you need to when you start looking at your recommendations of, well, what should they do here? My recommendation was to weld this blank flange on, make it something different than just spinning 4 bolts to be able to reinstall the device. Later on, as I was talking to people, they said, well, why not just remove the whole valve and then weld a blank flange on there? Then they really couldn't get to it again. But yeah, just that actual or potential is a big deal, is a big definition, and something you really need to think about. And you can't really, I won't say you can't trust people, but people will forget. So as soon as I actually will have a picture up here, and I'll tell another little story. Does everybody remember their AVB rules? Can you have a valve downstream of an AVB? Can you have constant pressure on an AVB for 24 hours a day? We have rules out there for making these things work. Those poppets will stick. Believe it or not, the rules are there for a reason. The installation requirements are there for a reason. There's some, I wish I could have included every picture I have, but there's really some great stuff. If you guys are out there and you're looking and you're doing hazard surveys and you come across something cool or something that you'd never seen before or something really goofy like this, take a picture and send it to me, would you? I mean, pictures are really are worth 1,000 words. And I love pictures, and I have a huge bank of them. I'll thank Terry again, Terry Pickle. He sends great pictures. He's always out there finding some cool stuff. But yeah, send them to me, because we need to learn from each other. And that we heard a commercial earlier in the day from AWWA about workforce development. And we're seeing a lot of turnover in the industry right now. And the long time people, the people that have been around forever, that have seen everything, they're leaving. And there's not just, a warm seat that needs to be filled. It's a lot of knowledge that's walking out the door. And we need to find a way to get that knowledge passed on to the next group. And so share. If it's not with me, share with somebody. Regional groups like SRC4 are fantastic. Get together, get talking about things that you see, problems that you have, nurturing that relationship between the cross-connection control specialist and the backflow assembly tester. There's just, I worry that, the old guard that have been doing it forever really are leaving. We've seen a 35% turnover in the number of certified operators in the last 5 years. That's 35% brand new operators, but we still have the same total number. So that means 35% left, and we brought in 35% new. You're seeing that trend line from being, 55 to 65 just a couple of years ago, and it's now trending down to, 30 and under, where we're getting a lot of young people, a lot of new people, a lot of people with different skill sets, people that are really computer savvy and not necessarily mechanically savvy. Whereas, the older generation was mechanically savvy and not necessarily computer savvy. So we're seeing that shift, and we need to share, and I'll get off my soapbox now. So installation is another big thing that you want to look at, because you'll ask them to install a backflow assembly. Does everybody know how these work? So this sleeve needs to slide over in order for you to access and repair this backflow assembly. And if you put a grounding clamp right here, how are they supposed to slide this over? You'll also see that they'll put in a weight support. So they'll put the support bar underneath this and put it right underneath the sleeve, so that when the backflow assembly tester has to come in and repair this backflow assembly, they have to jump through hoops to try to slide this sleeve over in order to make repairs inside. These are actually really cool backflow assemblies, though. They're when you take out those great big heavy swing check valves, They weigh about 2 million pounds, and you need basically a crane to get it out of there. You can actually just one person can put the replacement piece right in there. It's kind of neat, and they'll build little spool pieces to fill the gaps. Pretty neat stuff. New technologies. Access. This is behind a freezer. This is a freezer, this is the wall. They jammed the backflow assembly way back in there. You need access for testing and repairs. I would not want to repair this backflow assembly. And then, even then, how would you know if it was leaking, if it were leaking? This is always a fun one. Can you even find the backflow assembly in here? So these are the building officials will, when you're building a building with, like the soda machines, the fountain soda machines on the table, the building officials will come in and make sure that the RPBA is installed, but that's usually before the soda equipment comes in. So they'll come in, they'll sign off saying that the backflow assembly is there, and then the company will come in and they'll bring in all the soda equipment and then just bury the backflow assembly underneath all of this stuff because they don't really know what it is. I will also say in Washington that WAC 5156 does require an RPBA. I guess it's been a couple of months now, but somebody on the east side, a Coke distributor, called and was pretty mad at me because everywhere on the West Coast will accept the little plastic dual check with atmospheric vents that come with the soda machine. And he was telling me that everybody on the West Coast, every state on the West Coast accepts that. Well, that is not true. And anybody that tells you that, it's not true. WAC 5156 does require a reduced pressure principal backfill assembly for soda machines. And that's because of the carbonation. And the carbonation will leach out, the lead and bronze on these devices. And it's just kind of if you're interested, USC on their webpage has a pretty cool 2-page description of why we're concerned with soda machines and the CO2 that comes out of them. And it will, another kind of a fun one, it's been a year now, but one of our larger municipalities, they had a gas station that called air coming out of their water lines. They went out there and they took a look, and the CO2 tank in the back was all frosted over, and because the regulator had broke and there was no backflow protection on the soda machine. So it was actually blasting out of the CO2 tank as fast as it could through the soda machine into the water, into the plumbing, and it was actually spinning the meter backward at the road. And CO2 can do some nasty stuff to your biofilm layer. So this stuff does happen. It's been a while now because people have been doing pretty good, but a few years back, probably 10, 15 years, when people would call saying that they had gotten food poisoning from a restaurant, one of the first questions they would ask is, did you drink soda? Because they have that sensitivity to lead and stuff. How are you supposed to repair this? It fits really nice against the wall, but how are you supposed to get to this and repair it? One of the things that installation requirements are that if it's going to be higher than 5 feet, then you need to have a platform. This really isn't safe working conditions. You'll see it a lot when you go out there. And again, you need to be safe when you're testing backflow assemblies. There's I don't know how not to throw them under a bus. A company that they built a lot of buildings, and the backflow assemblies are up behind the ceiling panels. So you have to go all the way up there, and they're 10-foot ceilings, and you have to go up there and you have to remove the ceiling panel and find the backflow assembly. And it's really not safe. If they're up that high, they're supposed to have a platform that can hold a person permanently installed. Yeah, just be safe. So you take all this stuff out, you take the shelf out, you remove that back panel. There are 2 RPBAs back there. And only one person at this lab knew where those backflow assemblies were. And so, you know, just it's situations like this where things can get lost. You know, if they start leaking, you're not going to know. Annual testing can, you know, you're not going to be doing annual testing if you don't know they exist. This is one of my favorites, and I forget who sent this to me, who sent this one to me, but I absolutely love it. So water comes in, you know, this valve is open, so it goes around, goes through your RPBA, up, around, and out. You know, this valve is open. Why is this here? It's like, it's almost art. It's kind of, it could be sitting in the Getty somewhere, just people basking at its glory. But yeah, bypasses, no matter how pretty, have to have the same backflow protection as the main line does. Although I would say that this actually is the bypass and this is the main line. But yeah, I have no idea what they were thinking or doing here. Another bypass, you know, you'll see, you know, you attach a hose bib here. Pretty silly. But yeah, the bypass line has to have the same backflow protection as the main line does. Hazard surveys sometimes are pretty easy for the cross-country control specialist. When you look at a situation and you're going down there and they say, hey, I want you to do a hazard survey of this dock or pier, and you think to yourself, hey, wait a minute, I've seen those words before. We have kind of the get out of jail free card in our Washington Administrative Code, which is called our Table 9, our Table 9 facilities, where it kind of takes it out of your hands of, you know, we want a reduced pressure principal backflow assembly at the meter or the property line, because that's where the Drinking Water Rules Authority ends, is at the meter or the property line. And so when it gets to be something, you know, like a wastewater treatment plant or actually wastewater treatment plant's not a great example, but like a cannery or something where the plumbing is just so complex or there's just so many hazards going on that it's just too much, then we require that RPBA to be installed at the meter or the property line, and then everything else falls into the jurisdiction of the plumbing code. Yeah, it's because when you start walking down the dock, so piers and docks are on that Table 9. You'll see all these hoses, everything running inside the salt water. They're just not something you want to deal with. Some water systems do have an agreement with their local plumbing officials where they do have responsibility. But for the most part, our drinking water rules let you say, you know, too much. Complex, when you have complex plumbing, when you have access restricted or denied, there's lots of reasons why you just want to go ahead and make sure that there's an RPBA installed at the meter of the property line, and then just make sure that it's tested annually. Dan, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Oops, are we frozen? Dan Kegley, you wrote that you had a question? Oops, you look pretty frozen to me.
Looks like Dan might be frozen, yeah.
All right, we're gonna move along. Dan, just yell when you get your thing working again. But anyway, yeah, there's Yeah, this one was just kind of a disaster area, with, yeah, just everything in the water and just nothing you want to deal with. Other things, and this is kind of the poster child for cross connection control. You have a big yucky bucket of gross. You have a hose sticking into it with your hose tip right there. And you can actually see, the little equation of, you have a water line break causing, lower pressure in the water main than out here, and it sucks all that water in. Again, watering troughs. And this way, I kind of wanted to. I went out and I was doing a hazard survey at a farm, and almost an identical situation here, where they left the water cracked because they didn't want this to freeze. So they had constant water running so that it wouldn't freeze, which is scary, right? Because if you lost pressure, you have an opening directly to your potable water supply. It's going to suck everything out of here. And I like horses, but I don't want to drink anything that's been in their mouth. And so I told him, hey, you can't have it this way. There's different things. You can have a little air gap thing here. There's also devices that have like a little float valve on them. There's all kinds of stuff for horse watering troughs, and they, all very friendly. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we can take care of that. We understand everything. They removed the hose, curled it up, set it in this bathtub. Awesome, yeah. And so we went and we finished the survey. As I was pulling away, I saw a kid walking out there, reconnecting the hose, sticking it back in the trough. You couldn't even wait till I left. Come on. So yeah, it's not that you can't trust people. It's just that there's a lot of people, and not a lot of people that understand cross-connection control, and information doesn't get shared and within groups, and so yeah, it's hard to just rely on people to do the right thing.
Okay, I'm back, Bill. I don't know what happened. I just had a some sort of computer glitch. Anyway, as I was saying, there's a lot of change owner and ownership. People may not want to cooperate. Do you have any tips or tricks about other than just saying, well, if this is the law, like it or lump it, on getting some of that cooperation with some of those property owners? And then going back to, I think, a little previous slide, Jim Lottie had a question when you're talking about, installing or doing premise isolation and putting those RPs in vaults, or in front of the meter. What about your RPBA drains, especially in the built environment where you may not have an opportunity for that to daylight?
All right, two excellent questions. So I'm going to deal with the first one with uncooperative people. I am going to tell you that saying it's just the rules, it's just the rules. It's not, because I would rely on this every once in a while, and I'm guilty. It's not me. If you don't like it, call the state. They're the one making you do it. That is so counterproductive to your own goal that you wouldn't believe, because then you're forming this relationship with this person of not liking the government, agreeing that it shouldn't have to be done. And then hey, well, you're on my side. You don't want to do it either, so I'm not going to do it. Well, no, wait, that's not what I meant. What I meant was you need to do it. I was hoping that you would just bite that the state says you have to. Sometimes, explaining it is always great of why, and then explaining that it's also protecting the building owner is also very helpful. Another nice little tip is, ask them to contact their insurance company and say, hey, if I'm meeting all of my cross-connection control requirements, will you give me a little break on my insurance? If they're not going to get a break on their insurance, but it does give them that incentive of, hey, maybe this is the right thing. If somebody gets sick or heaven forbid somebody dies, and it's because of something that they were refusing to do, their liability goes way, way up. And so, yeah, it's just kind of explaining what's going on. And especially in today's culture, there's a lot of, this is just the government overreaching. There's no reason for this. You need to, shouldn't have anything to do with the government. I mean, this is nothing, you want to protect your public water distribution system, and, making sure everybody's safe is everybody's goal. Nobody wants to get other people sick. And so just that explanation, just that take that time to be patient, and then waiting is kind of my rule of thumb. Let them run out of steam, because I get these every day, of the rant of, blah blah blah. They practice their little speech that they're going to give me, and I just let them go, and then towards the end, after 10, 15 minutes, you actually hear them start apologizing that they finally got it off their chest, and now they're ready to listen. And so, but then, there's always going to be somebody that you can't reach, and you're going to have to go through the whole process. But I found very good success with just patience, explaining why this is the way it is, dropping that nugget on insurance. Hey, your liability insurance may go down if you're meeting all the cross-country control rules. And then, but yeah, it's tough. It's not easy. And then the second one was RPBAs in a vault. So RPBAs are not allowed to be installed in a vault. And I know over there on the east side, it gets cold. And so they need to be above ground, or there is called the semi-buried vault. As long as the RPBA is above ground, that air gap below can be below ground, as long as there's a drain open to atmosphere. So you have to be a daylight drain, so you have to be able to see daylight through the drain, coming out the side of a hill. Or, the hot boxes need power, and sometimes you're a long way from power. The public utility, there is a thing in the WAC that says you're allowed to have an alternate location for your RPBA to be installed, generally the first penetration of the building, with 1 or 2 discrete connections between the meter and the RPBA for irrigation, basically, that you can have double check valve assemblies, but those are case by case basis, and they need to be documented by the utility of why they allowed that. But we'll see a lot of alternate locations, because that RPBA would be way out there. You have to run power out there for a hot box. And so it just makes a lot more sense to have a long-term solution, right inside the building. Does that answer everybody's questions?
Hey, Bill, this is Brian St. Clair. On that daylight drain, don't you have to make sure it's not below the floodplain?
Well, I didn't hear that. Did somebody hear that better than me? Can you repeat it a little louder? I'm sorry.
Sure. On the daylight drain, you have to make sure it's above the floodplain. You can't let them stick it in a bar ditch.
Yes, that's an excellent point. The daylight drain has to be above the floodplain. And I'll give a quick little story. A little town on the coast, they installed their RPBAs in a vault by a pier, for each pier. And the daylight drain went right out into the beach. Looked great. Hey, that's awesome. You lift up the panel and you'll see that there was seaweed and slug and all kinds of life growing inside the box and on the backflow assembly. So when they had a high tide, it was the RPBAs were actually submerged when they had a really high tide. And so, yeah, you need to remember that, you can't have this stuff submerged, because it is an opening into your water distribution system. Excellent point. Thank you. Did everybody answer the poll question?
We are missing a few. We're still waiting on about 5 folks.
Get it done, or I'll yell at you.
Yeah, for some reason, I'm unable to answer the poll question.
That may explain it. It may be our co-host setting.
All right, moving right along. Fire hydrant use, something to consider. I think Spokane has a pretty cool setup right now for higher fire hydrant connections, where they have the double check valve assemblies in a box, so they can't be messed with. But yeah, you can't just tap directly into a fire hydrant. RVs are kind of tricky situations. Does everybody know that the white hoses are for potable water use? That's kind of a little tidbit. But you got your sewage dump right there. And the reason I threw this picture in is because, have you guys seen these? So you hook your water line up to here, and it helps flush out the sewage, the waste tank of the RV. But then you have this connection directly with your potable water line, and I don't know. There's just RVs are hard to do surveys on. But yeah, there's lots of shenanigans going on. There needs to be an RPBA on the dump station. You know, usually as you're leaving the park, you'll see a little waste dump station. The potable water line there needs to have an RPBA installed. That's a rule. But yeah, these hose bibs everywhere should at least have an AVB, or should have a hose bib vacuum breaker, even though that's not adequate, because as we all know, you know, it can't be under pressure for more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period. Shouldn't have any elevated piping, no downstream valves. You know, that you check all the boxes here, but there should be something at RV sites. The test cocks, you can plug anything you want into those, right? At least this one's on number 4. Oftentimes you'll see it at number 1, going out and using something. But no, according to CCC, nothing should be plugged into the test cock ports except for test cocks. I have seen little gauges installed there, and I've never really given people much grief for that. But you know, just use a potable water connection. That's not what it's there for. This is another one of my favorite pictures, just because I love duct tape. Can you guys see what's going on here? So there's your double check valve assembly going directly into a pump. You've got your number 1 test cock is now the pressure switch. You got a heater here because it obviously freezes. Covers are optional, I guess, for the pressure switch. The other test cocks have been broken off. I love this picture, man. This is just something I would do. All right. So disconnect air and water when not in use. That's not, again, we can't rely on people to do the right thing. The potable water line should have an RPBA on it. Especially when you're, because this one, I think it was actually the compressed air actually put this higher than the potable water line pressure. Laboratory sinks, always something to consider when you go in there. There's also the hood vents. Often have water taps, water connections in them. Yeah, there's lots and lots of different uses for water in a laboratory. So just things to think about when you're out there and looking. This is a kind of a gross one. So above here is a bunch of cages where they temporarily would put dogs in a veterinary clinic. So I think there were 9, there were more than that. I think 12 dogs in a cage. All their business dropped to the bottom of this trough, and then they just left this water running to wash all the yuck away. So just a submerged hose, and the drain would clog, and this would fill up. It was just not anything you want an open pipe connected to. That was a nasty place anyway. Oops. So waste drain up on the floor above got clogged every once in a while because there was so much yuck coming down into it. And so they would just open up this valve and flush out the drain. No big deal because they always shut that valve when they were done. When we were down there, they went up to show that it was shut and it was actually open. Yeah, no direct connections to waste drains. There should always be an air gap. So BMI, Backflow Management Inc., they had a video at one time where they did a little experiment and they submerged a double check valve assembly in blue water. And then they ran water through the backflow assembly. And it actually, you saw blue water coming out the end of the backflow assembly because of slight leakage through the test cocks. So you actually, sucked water in from basically, in this situation, it would pull the swamp water through the backflow assembly. Rules say that these have to be plugged if they're going to be in a vault, if they're going to be below ground. And RPBAs cannot be in a vault. And if there is a vault, there should be drainage. You shouldn't be relying on a sump pump. But there are tons and tons and tons of these out there where you go out to test the backflow assembly and you have to pump out the vault in order to get to it. And it's just not safe conditions. It's going to lower the life expectancy of your backflow assembly. Again, if there's any kind of opening anywhere, even just a small crack, it can actually pull water in as water's flowing through the backflow assembly. Yeah, I don't know why we love these so much. This is a garbage disposal. So when the garbage disposal comes on, the solenoid opens and water flows through here. It's not okay. Actually, this had been corrected, but I took the picture anyway because it was a lot of fun. Yeah, lots of stuff will get connected because they just don't know that backflow can happen. Air gaps, lots and lots and lots of air gap problems in the world. 2 times the pipe diameter above the overflow rim of the tank. If the pipe is cut at an angle, as you'll see sometimes, it's below the lowest point. So 2 times the pipe diameter measured from the lowest point to the overflow rim. I threw this in there because I don't know if you guys have a bunch of reservoirs, but can you imagine a 4-inch line running full blast? Is this going to stay on there? Yeah, and it's going to clog up. It's going to give you problems later on in life. Air gaps are below RPBAs as well. So there should be 2 times the pipe diameter below the RPBA. This is when we see an awful lot, and I don't know why. So it's below the overflow rim of the tank. This little overflow doesn't count. So just because it's above this overflow doesn't mean it's the overflow rim of the tank. So it needs to be above everything. And then air gaps, if you wrap them up, you've pretty much eliminated the air gap. On the other side of here, there was some pumps and electrical equipment, so they didn't want it splashing on there. There is nothing wrong with putting a splash guard on one side to make sure that nothing splashes over there, but you can't just wrap it up in plastic. It's no longer an air gap anymore. Oh, this was a fun one. So this was at a wastewater treatment plant. This was their reclaimed water that they would send to a couple of golf courses. But sometimes they didn't make enough reclaimed water, so they had a potable water makeup line that would keep this tank full so they can keep the golf courses irrigated. And this is actually ground level, is just above the top of this valve. And as the maintenance guy was telling me that, that never, ever, there's not a problem here. That's ridiculous. One of the guys that are working there came and was all laughing, saying, "Oh yeah, one time this valve got stuck open, and this whole thing was underwater. It was just all the way up. It looked like a giant swimming pool, and some of the other parts of the wastewater treatment plant were submerged, so things were just floating around and yes, but these are things when you're talking about new construction, when you guys get a chance to take a look, there was no reason why during the construction phase they shouldn't have put this above ground. It would have been free. It wouldn't have cost them anything to do this the right way. To retrofit this, to change it, is going to be just an incredibly expensive. Yeah, but yeah, it's always funny to have somebody tell you that it can't happen, and then somebody walk right up and say it did happen. It was sinks. They should all be having active serve vacuum breakers now installed. But again, those rules: no downstream valves, no elevated piping. Even then, you shouldn't be having things submerged, below the air gap from the plumbing code has to be from here to here. And if you attach a hose, anybody see any kind of problem with this installation? They have to be installed in the orientation to which they are approved. All of your PVBAs or SVBAs need to be installed in the horizontal position. Or, yeah. At least it was there, though. This is a fun one. So a floor above on here, they used to have an air gap in a tank with a little pump. When they built the place, that's the way it was. But then they added new equipment, and that air gap and tank and pump no longer met the needs of all the new equipment. And so when they were looking to see what to do, they said, well, we have plenty of water upstream of the air gap and tank. So they just got rid of it. They just bypassed it and ran water directly to your waste activated sludge pumps and seal water tanks. Really, really gross. They've since fixed it, but yeah. RPBAs, backflow assemblies are assemblies. They need to be, two shut-off valves, whatever's in between, 4 test cocks. You can't disassemble them, or they no longer are approved assemblies. Again, look for auxiliary water supplies when you're out there. They're common, and they shouldn't be. And this is just a quick story on this one. So backflow event happened at a mill. Couldn't figure it out because they had RPBAs that were tested at the meters. And so they had 2 connections, both had RPBAs. Everything should have been fine. They winterized their sprinkler system, and air was getting into the distribution system. Turns out they had another connection on the other side of the property to the distribution main that nobody knew about. Only one person did. So yeah, talk to people while you're out there and try to find some things. This is just a funny one. If you have a double check valve assembly and you need to have an RPBA installed, you can just put a funnel under the number 2 test cock or number 3 test cock. And that is a lie. It's not the same thing. But I thought it's very clever, but wrong.
So Bill, we've got about just about a minute to well, look at that. And there's a question slide. What timing?